Hey everyone, going to try something a little bit different here, something fresh and new. Get away from the solos for a bit. I think it might be fun, maybe kind of interesting and informative. I'm going to pick my top 10 favorite riffs from each decade, starting with the 50s, and work my way episode by episode right up until this decade. That should give us 7 decades and 7 episodes to get through. I'm going to count down and play my favorites from each decade and then amend tutorials to the end of each video on how to play them all. Cool, huh? I thought so. Now, the real era of guitar riffing basically started in the 60s, and there's loads to choose from out of the 60s. And that's where I was initially going to start. But I thought that I'd back it up one decade and start with the 50s because there's some cool, notable, and very important guitar riffs from that decade worth digging into and having a look at. That said, the main problem with guitar riffs in the 50s is that they tended to be really short. The guitar as an instrument back in the 50s was still very much a rhythm instrument, and only a few players really brought it to the forefront to let it shine. However, even when they did get the guitar riff right out front, the intro riffs were generally kept pretty short before the singing and the song proper started. Regardless, many of them are still quite noteworthy, so we're going to give it a shot. So let's begin, shall we? Coming in at number 10 and released in September of 1957 is the first of 3 instrumental tracks on this list. One called Raunchy by 50s rock and roll artist Bill Justice. Raunchy is one of the first rock songs to use more of a country twang lead guitar sound, which was later developed by others and became quite common for several years following one of its first appearances here on this track. We're basically talking about the birth of rockabilly here, the blending of country, blues, and jazz and rock and roll, I suppose. It's also generally considered to be the first rock and roll instrumental hit, rising as high as number 2 on the Billboard charts at the time. There were actually 3 different versions of Raunchy by 3 different artists, all competing with each other at the same time on the 1957 music charts. Bill Justice's version would eventually win out and go down in history as pretty much the definitive version of this song. One more notable story with regards to Raunchy is that in 1958, then 14-year-old George Harrison performed it as his audition for John Lennon and Paul McCartney on the top deck of a bus in Liverpool. And he played it so note perfect that John Lennon decided, despite his earlier reservations about George Harrison's age, to let him into his band, the Quarrymen. Now, the Quarrymen, of course, as we all know, George, John, Paul, and some drummer that no one's ever heard of, would go on to change their name a few years later to the Led Zeppelins, and go on to have a few hit records in Japan and certain parts of Southeast Asia. Wait a second, that doesn't sound right. Let me check my Bible here. Okay. John Lennon on the bus, the Led Zeppelins, Japan, Southeast. Yeah, no, looks good. See, that's what I love about doing these videos. They're so informative and well researched. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, here we are. Starting things off at number 10. This is my cover of George Harrison on a Bus, with his cover of Bill Justice's Raunchy from his 1957 album, Cloud 9. Coming in at number 9 on my list of the greatest guitar riffs of the 50s is a fairly simple 12-bar blues riff, but it's generally considered to be the very first rock and roll song, and also the very first known recorded use of distorted guitar. Thus, it being considered more of a rock and roll song than a blues track, I suppose, despite being a blues track at its core. The track I'm talking about at number 9 is called Rocket 88 by Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats, released in April of 1951. Now, confusion abounds on the story of this classic track, so let me try to explain it as best I can. In the early 50s, a young Ike Turner had a band called Ike Turner and his Kings of Rhythm, and the band wrote Rocket 88, and Ike asked his saxophone player Jackie Brenston, who co-wrote the song with Ike, to sing vocals on it. Now, Jackie Brenston also had a separate band called Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats. The Delta Cats were actually Ike Turner's band, the Kings of Rhythm. Confused yet? I know I am. Let's check the Bible again. Hold on a sec. Now, when it came time to press the record, it was printed and released as Rocket 88 by Jackie Brenston and the Delta Cats by mistake. It was supposed to be released as Ike Turner and his Rhythm Kings. Whoops. Now, surely someone took a literal beating from Ike Turner over this screw-up, though we can't be certain, as it went on to be a number 1 hit for 3 weeks in a row on the Billboard R&B chart shortly after its release. Before we get into it, a quick word about why this one's important, despite just being a 12-bar blues riff. Distortion, and like I said, the first known use of guitar distortion in history. Guitarist for Ike Turner's band, a fellow with the wonderful name of Willie Kizzert, dropped his amplifier in transit on the way to the studio, and the speaker fell out. In their haste to get started recording, they jammed wadded newspaper into the cabinet to hold the speaker in place for the recording of Rocket 88. As a result of this jerry-rigging, they unintentionally created a distorted guitar sound coming out of the amplifier. Producer Sam Phillips liked this new sound very much indeed and decided to use it, and rock and roll history was made. So without further ado, this is Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats with Ike Turner and his Rhythm Kings and Rocket 88 at number 9. Rolling right along at number 8, we have a track by a guy who knew just a little bit about the electric guitar, and a song that would spend 25 weeks on the Billboard charts, including 9 weeks at number 1. At number 8, we have How High the Moon by the inventor of the Fender Stratocaster, the great Les Paul. And featuring the vocals of the lovely and talented Mary Ford. How High the Moon was essentially a Broadway jazz standard throughout much of the 40s until Les Paul got his hands on it in 1951 and collaborated in the studio with the aforementioned vocalist Mary Ford to bring something new to it. It's generally considered the first recording to use overdubbed multi-tracked guitars and layered vocals, and was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1979, and is on the list at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as one of the songs that shaped rock and roll. Absolutely filled with guitar goodness throughout the entire track. Go listen to it, for God's sakes. I'm just going to hit you up with the opening riff, which is pretty short, so I'm going to play through it twice. But man, was this guy good. Someone really should, name a guitar after him someday. So anyway, let's have a look at this one. At number 8, this is Mary Ford and the legendary Les Paul with the really nifty and jazzy little riff from How High the Moon. All right, number 7, time for some blues. I couldn't possibly have a list of the greatest guitar riffs without having some Muddy Waters in there somewhere. He did invent electricity, after all, or so the movie Crossroads would have me believe. I'll take that as fact. I love that movie. At number 7, we have Mannish Boy by the great Muddy Waters, first recorded in 1955. The song is both an arrangement of and an answer song to Bo Diddley's I'm a Man, which was in turn inspired by Muddy Waters' own and Willie Dixon's Hoochie Coochie Man a few years earlier. Mannish Boy would spend 6 weeks on the Billboard R&B charts, reaching as high as number 5, and has gone down in history as one of the great blues standards of all time. The repetitive guitar riff to Mannish Boy is pretty easy to play, but it's very memorable and instantly recognizable. Muddy Waters used the same basic riff on his song Hoochie Coochie Man, and the riff appears on many other blues songs in both the 5-note version and the shortened 4-note version. George Thorogood would use it again nearly 30 years later and recreate Mannish Boy into his massive hit song Bad to the Bone. This is number 7 on my list, a basic but very important riff in the history of rock and roll and blues guitar. This is Muddy Waters and Mannish Boy from May 1955. Number 6. At number 6, we have the oh-so-simple and oh-so-famous guitar riff from the instrumental Rebel Rouser by Mr. Twang himself, Duane Eddy. Released in 1958, some would call Rebel Rouser the twang heard round the world, as Duane Eddy is generally considered one of the main progenitors of rockabilly guitar and its inherent guitar twanginess. Is that a word? This song was such a huge hit worldwide, climbing to number 6 on the Billboard music charts in the late 50s. This is my second of 3 guitar instrumentals on this list, one more still to come, that charted quite highly back in the 50s. Instrumentals seemed to be a rather big thing back then from the looks of it. You certainly don't see that these days, at least on the mainstream music charts. Anyway, not a hell of a lot to say about this one. No fun stories that I could find. Oh, here's a fun one. Duane Eddy is still alive. He's 82 years old, and I'm pretty sure that he's the only artist from this list that's still kicking. Good for him. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I rarely am. So anyway, this is number 6. This is Mr. Twang, Duane, still kicking, Eddy, and Rebel Rouser from his 1958 album Have Twangy Guitar, Will Travel. Oh, and it was also in Forrest Gump, of course. Into the top 5 we go, and at number 5 we have a song and a riff that you all surely know, but most of you will associate it with the wrong artist. The song and the riff is from the smash hit single Suzie Q, and the wrong artist that you're probably thinking of would be John Fogerty and Creedence Clearwater Revival. The right artist would be rockabilly artist Dale Hawkins. Or maybe I'm just a musical idiot and didn't know that Suzie Q was a song from the 50s, but I do now. But anyway, Dale Hawkins, pioneer of swamp rock boogie, cousin of Ronnie Hawkins. Anyone? Bueller? How about James Burton? Hear of him? James Burton? Anyone? Some say that James Burton was actually the one who played guitar on Suzie Q, not Dale Hawkins, who also played guitar, by the way, despite it being a Dale Hawkins composition. I don't know. I got confused researching it, so I gave up trying to figure it out. But one thing that I do know, that if it was indeed James Burton who played it, he's still alive as well, which kind of blows my whole Duane Eddy theory to hell. Maybe they should get together and jam, Duane Eddy and James Burton. Maybe they already have. Who knows? Anyway, Hawkins wrote and released the original version of Suzie Q in May of 1957 and had a respectable hit with the track, reaching as high as number 7 on the Billboard music charts. Of course, 11 years later, in 1968, John Fogerty and CCR would remake the song and it would launch their career, becoming their first top 40 hit and the only top 40 hit that the band ever had that they didn't write themselves. So without further ado, this is Dale Hawkins, or maybe James Burton, with the fantastic riff to Suzie Q from his 1958 album Oh Suzie Q, coming in at number 5. My number 4 greatest riff of the 50s is by the great Howlin' Wolf with Hubert Sumlin on guitar with the classic blues track Smokestack Lightning. Now, while not having the mainstream success of many of the songs on my top 10 riffs of the 50s, I'd be remiss not to include one or two blues riffs, and I've already included some Muddy Waters. There was just too much great blues guitar happening at the time to gloss over it. Like I said, Muddy Waters, B.B. King, Willie Dixon, John Lee Hooker, amongst countless others. I'm a huge Howlin' Wolf fan, and this is one of my favorite tracks of his, so I had to include it on my list. In my humble opinion, no one had such a flavorful growl of a voice for the blues, quite like Mr. Chester Arthur Burnett, aka Howlin' Wolf. That said, you really want to hear someone wail on this one, check out Soundgarden's cover of this one. Unbelievable some of the notes Cornell hits on this one. We were up into like dog territory, dog whistle territory. So without further ado, again, from January 1956, this is Howlin' Wolf and Hubert Sumlin with the smokin' riff to Smokestack Lightnin' at number 4. Coming in at number 3, we have Let's Get Ready to Rumble by Link Wray, the guitar instrumental so dangerous that it was banned in several American radio markets for fear of causing gang violence. What? Strange, but true. The reason it was banned was because the term rumble was then and still is a slang term for a gang fight, and it was feared that the piece's harsh sound would glorify juvenile delinquency and promote gang violence. Scary stuff. Rumble was released in March of 1958 and was one of the first guitar tracks to ever utilize distortion, feedback, tremolo, and the all-important power chord. That one. Important stuff, to say the least, for rock and roll going forward. Bob Dylan has called Rumble the greatest instrumental ever written, and upon hearing it, it also caused a young Iggy Pop to drop out of school to pursue a career in music. Maybe they were right, after all, about the juvenile delinquency part. You'll know this one, even if you don't know the song by its title. It's been used in a lot of films and TV, most notably Pulp Fiction and the pilot episode of The Sopranos, amongst loads of others, including SpongeBob SquarePants. So without further ado, this is Link Wray and Rumble. Now, don't go out and start a gang fight once you hear it. I take no responsibility for inciting gang violence with my little video. All right, we're into the top two and a couple of the more famous ones. My number two is unfortunately by another dead guy who sadly went out at a very, very young age, far too early. He didn't even get himself out of the 50s, for crying out loud, the poor bugger, dying only 8 months into his recording career at the age of 17. His name was Ritchie Valens. And his utterly fantastic little riff is from his mega hit La Bamba. Of course, Valens would die in that tragic plane crash in Iowa on February 3rd, 1959, that would also claim the lives of the Big Bopper and Buddy Holly, a day that would forever be referred to as the day the music died. But while he lived, man, did he create some music worth listening to, and that would go down in history. La Bamba, of course, Come On, Let's Go, Donna, all becoming major hit singles, and all of this from a kid barely 17 years old. Such a horrible loss to the 50s music community and beyond, that this massive talent wouldn't see his 18th birthday, being the youngest to die on that tragic flight at just 17 years old. What wonderful music this kid could have gone on to produce. We'll never hear or know, sadly. This is La Bamba by the great Ritchie Valens, my number two pick of the greatest guitar riffs of the 50s. Well, now we've reached number one. Can you guess what it is? It's not so hard to guess, I would imagine. It's basically my inspiration for doing this project in the first place. I recently covered this one as part of my little project of learning and playing my way through Guitar World Magazine's top 100 solos of all time. If you're not familiar with it, I'll put a link to it down below, or you can just check out my channel. This one sits at number 12 of the greatest guitar solos of all time. Rolling Stone magazine lists it as the number 7 greatest rock and roll song of all time. This would, of course, be Stairway to Heaven by the Quarrymen, featuring George Harrison. Johnny B. Goode by Chuck Berry, of course, from 1958. Not so much a riff, I suppose, as it is an intro solo, but it still takes my top spot because this is my video and that's what I wanted to do. Lifted directly note for note from the big band swing standard from the 40s, Ain't That Just Like a Woman by Louis Jordan, Chuck Berry would electrify it, speed it up, and give it some teeth and make it all his own. Few know or remember the Louis Jordan track that Chuck Berry lifted this from, but everybody knows Johnny B. Goode, making this one one of, if not the most recognizable guitar riff intro solos in music history. So let's get to it. This is my number 1 riff from the 50s, from 1958, with a bullet. This is Johnny B. Goode. Well, that's it. I certainly hope you enjoyed watching that as much as I enjoyed researching, learning, and practicing all of the riffs and putting it all together. It was a hell of a lot of fun. Stay tuned because I'm going to show you how to play all of these riffs at the end of this video. Some will only take a few seconds, I think. Some will take a few minutes. Some will take a bit longer. We'll see how this goes. Going to move on into the 60s next, where the pool of great riffs to choose from gets exponentially larger. So anyway, we'll see you soon when we get into the 60s. You guys take care of yourselves. I hope you're well in your little guitar corner of the world, and we'll see you next time. Ciao. All right, so the first one we're going to have a look at is my number 10. This is Raunchy by Bill Davis. So get those fingers limbered up because this one's tough. Not that hard. So anyway, this is kind of what it sounds like. And that's pretty much it. So you're basically open A to the 3rd fret with a little half step bend, maybe even a quarter step bend, down to the open D, and then onto the 3rd fret of the D for another little quarter step bend, and then release to D. And then you do the same thing again. And this time when you go to the 3rd fret of the D, you hit it twice. And then release to D. So that's basically it. That first one's kind of a slow bend. And so you do that twice, and then you go into a little strumming pattern, G, D, A major, G, D. And then back into that again. And that's pretty much it for Raunchy. All right, so Rocket 88 by, this is my number 9, Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats. This one's pretty easy, just 12-bar blues and just single note type stuff, so. And that's just open E, little double hits on each note, up to 4 of the E, down to the 2nd fret of the A string, up to the 4th fret of the A string. and then back to the 2nd fret of the A. 4 times. And that's your first 4 bars of the 12-bar blues. And then you just move the whole thing down to the next 2 strings. Twice. Back up. Now, I like to play the next part here. So that's it's a bit of a stretch. You can also play it here. So that's 2 of the A string down to 1 of the D string, up to 4, down to 1 of the G, back up to 4 of the D. I prefer to play it here. So that's 2 of the A string up to 6 of the A, down to 4 of the D, and then a little pull off with your pinky from 6 to 4, and then back to the A pattern of that, and then back to the beginning. And that's the 12 bars, so that's pretty easy. And that's it for Rocket 88. All right, so now we're into number 8, Les Paul and How High the Moon. So we're up here at the 14th fret. You're going to want to bar the entire 14th fret from the D string on down, so the bottom 4 strings. And then you're going to get your pinky up on the 17th fret of the high E for a little 4-note down, up, down. And then you're going to get your ring finger up on 17 of the D for 2 little downstrokes of the entire pattern. And then move the whole thing down to 16, not the whole thing, but just your D string. And then down to 15. And then you're going to come up here to the 19th fret of the B and the 20th fret of the high E for 4 half-step bends. And then you're going to do the whole thing again. And the next time you're going to slide out of the bar. And that's pretty much it for How High the Moon, at least the opening riff. But it's really hard to get those notes to ring when you're up here trying to get that bar. It's tough. And that's it for How High the Moon. All right, so now we're into our number 7. This is Mannish Boy by Muddy Waters, and this is the same riff throughout the entire song. So it's this one's not tough either. So basically, it's the 5-note version of this blues lick, and the 4-note version would be that's 4 notes, and the 5-note. So open A, and you've got your little power chord A there, up to the 5th fret of the A, the D note, back to open A, and then onto the 3rd fret of the A, and then back to the final power chord. That's it for Mannish Boy, the entire song. And so that's it for that one. All right, so my number 6 was Rebel Rouser by Dwayne Eddy. And this is a fun lick and very famous. But so it kind of goes something like this. Buzz going on there. But so anyway, you're going to start with at the second fret of the low E with a little bend, release, and then release to the open string. And then open E to 4 of the E, and then open A to 2 of the A. And then back to 4 of the E, and then release it to the open E, down to the open A, and then open A to 4 of the A, down to 2 of the D, and then roll back up to 2 of the A. And then this bend again. And then back to that twice. And then the second time, a little double hit on the second fret of the A. And then back to that again. And then the drums come in. So that whole intro part. And then the drums come in and you start over. That's pretty much it for the opening to Rebel Rouser. All right, so now we're into Suzie Q by Dale Hawkins. So anyway, this one is a little bit tricky because it's finger picking. But here's your basic notes. That's 3rd fret of the B string. And then you're going to slide from 3 to 2 of the G, and then pull off to the open G. And then hammer on the open D to the 2nd fret of the D for 2 hits. And then hammer on open A to the 2nd fret of the 2nd fret of the A. And then to the open D to the 2nd fret of the D. And that's basically the melody. Now the tricky part is getting all the bass notes in there. There's a bass note going along, you know, every note of the bar. So now, some of those are on the note, the melody, and some of them are not. So that's a little tricky. So let me slow it down, and this is one of the trickier ones on the list. So you're going to start with an open E, and then you're going to grab your melody line. So there's your first 2 bass notes, and then one by itself. So slowly, watch for the bass notes. So there's basically a bass note along with the entire pattern. So once you get it, you got it. But it's a fun little pattern to play. And that's it for Suzie Q. All right, so we're at number 4, and Smokestack Lightning by Howlin' Wolf, and this is a great blues riff. Probably the hardest on the list to get down because, like Suzie Q, it's finger picked and it's got a melody line, but it also has a lot of bass notes, and some of them are on the note and some of them are not. So here's your melody line. So basically, open E, and then you're going to grab the 3rd fret of the E and give it a little half step bend. And then you're going to slide from, well, let me play it first. And so you're going to grab the open E, and then you're going to grab the 3rd fret and give it a half step bend. And then slide from 2 to 4 on the G string, and then grab the 3rd fret of the B. And then back up to the 4th fret of the G. And then you're going to slide from 4 to 2, and then pull off to open G. And then pull off from 2 to open, back to 2 on the D. So you do that twice, and the next 2 times you go, instead of, you go to the 3rd fret of the B. And then back. So that note on the record, he's really just grabbing that one note at the 3rd fret. But if you catch a little bit of the B string on your way up, so be it. That works as well. Now, the tricky part about this is the bass notes. There's a bass note running throughout the entire thing. And that's basically on every beat. So I'm going to run through the whole thing slowly so you can get the bass notes. Some of them, like I said, are on the note of the melody. The first 2 are, and the 3rd one's not. And the 4th one last 4, I think, are on the melody line. So yeah, basically the first, the 3rd and 4th bass note are not playing along with the melody line. And that takes practice. And when I was first learning it, I'm like, what the hell? I can't get this. And you get a good beat going with the time, you know, for the bass notes with your foot, and it'll start coming together. And that's it for Smokestack Lightning. All right, so my number 3 was Rumble by Link Wray, and this one's pretty easy as well. So we're going to give a D. D, basically your basic D major. And and you're going to just rake down the 4 notes of the D chord, and then you're going to go up to E major. And you basically do that twice. And then back to D again. And then to an A power chord, the first power chord ever used in rock and roll, I think. And then back to D, to E. Back to D. And now we're into B7 territory. So you're basically 2nd fret of, if you're not familiar with B7, 2nd fret of the A, 1st fret of the D, 2nd fret of the G, and then your pinky down on the 2nd fret of the high E. And then you're just going to ride that down. And then you got like a 4 count. 2, 3, 4. And that's basically right down the pentatonic. So that's 3 open, 3 open, 2 open, 2 open, 2 open. 3rd fret of the E with a bend to the open E. So let me just run through that quickly. So D, D, E major. D, D, E major. D, D, A power chord. D, D, E major. D, D, B7. And then there's a solo in there after about 2 minutes of that. Sliding into the 12th fret there, and then it just back into that again. So pretty simple stuff. And so anyway, that's it for Rumble. All right, so now we're at La Bamba with the great Ritchie Valens at my number 2. And this is basically just, you know, G, C, F. So you want to get your G shape, your C shape, and your F shape. And that's G, 3rd fret. And then 3rd fret of the E down to open A to 2 to 3. And now we're into the C shape. So you just ride the next 2 notes down the C shape. And now jump down to your F shape. So that's 3rd fret of the D, 2nd fret of the G, and then off to the open G string. And then back up to your G shape. And then 2 hits at the 3rd fret of the D to the 2nd fret to the open D. And then repeat. And that just before the there's a little stop there before the singing starts or before the band comes in, and that's kind of that's basically just bouncing between the 2nd fret of the G, back up to the 4th fret or 3rd fret of the D, and then open D, open G. So that's pretty much it for La Bamba, and then he gets into the chords. And that's C, F, G. So La 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 Bamba. And that's it for La Bamba. All right, so we're going to finish up. My number one was Johnny Be Good. All right, so we're going to slide into 7 of the G, down to 6 of the B, up to 8 of the B. That'll get you started. And then you're going to grab a bar on the bottom 2 strings at the 5th fret, and you're going to slide it into 6. And you're going to do that 3 times. So you slide and then hit 3 times, I think, all downstrokes. The last time you only hit it 2 times. That's correct. First 2 times, 3 times. Last time, 2 times. And then you're going to, one more time. And then you're going to go 9, 8, 6 on the B. And then you're going to hammer on 6 to 7. 6 to 7 of the G, and then up to 8 of the D. And then you're going to go down here and do that same pattern, but you're going to do it the octave lower. Up here at the on the D and the G string at this going from 2 to 3. And then you're going to grab this little double. I don't know what that's called. It's not a chord. So we're at the 7th fret of the G and the 6th fret of the B. And you're going to hit that twice. And then you're going to pull off from 8 to 6 of the B string. And then you're going to move that whole pattern down 5 to 3 of the G, up to 5 of the D. So up to that point. And one final note right there at the 3rd fret of the G. So, one more time. And now we're into these little double stop, 5 times each. That's the first 5. And that's the second 5. So we're at the 6th fret, barring the bottom 2 strings, and then little half step bends on the 8th fret of the G. So you do that 5 times twice, and then one more time to get you into the next part of the next lick. So basically we're in this little Dorian shape here. Down to the 6th fret, up to 9, 8, 6 again, and then up to 8 of the high E, and then that little pattern again, and then up to 8 of the G, and then hammer on 6 to 7 of the G. So we're coming out of the double stops. And then after you get that little hammer on there to 7, you're going to rake down 7 of the G, and then 6 of the B and the E. So you're going to rake down, and then you're going to go 9, 8, 6 of the B. And then you're going to go, you're going to do that again, just twice, the little double stops. And then 8, hammer on 6 to 7 of the G, up to 8 of the D. And that finishes the intro solo. So I'm going to run through that one more time slowly. One more time slowly. And that's how you play the intro solo to Johnny B. Good. And thank you all for watching my video. I hope you liked it. And we're going to do the 60s next. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pick out 10 of my favorites. And then I'm going to teach you how to play them. And so we'll see you next time.